Welcome back to the Real Intelligence Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Swim, and I'm so glad you're here. If I read the definition of intelligence, it says the mental capacity to acquire, understand, and apply knowledge. Basically, when we access intelligence, we are reasoning, we're planning, we're decoding information, we're pattern recognizing, we're making decisions in our life. And so often we do this all mentally. One thing I've noticed in people is that there's a really strong source of intelligence that we sometimes struggle to trust. And that's what we're going to talk about today. This intelligence source is intuition. The concept of intuition can seem really vague. So let's start out by defining what is intuition. And then we'll talk about why might we want to pay attention to our intuition when it comes and how we can maybe build more trust in that intuition. So we know when we're responding to genuine intuition versus perhaps a fear or anxiety or something else. Albert Einstein is said to have called intuition a sacred gift. Steven Spielberg called intuition a whisper from the heart. If you look up the definition of intuition, it's the ability to understand or know something without conscious reasoning. How might you define intuition? When I was a young mom, I had just put my kids to bed. And I had kind of a pattern I went through, like many of us do, for a bedtime routine. And I remember one night getting into bed, and I just had this thought to just get up and check on my child one more time. So I got up, I went to the bottom of the stairs. They were on the second level, and our master bedroom was on the main level. And as I looked up to start walking up the stairs, I noticed my child at the top of the stairs trying to climb over the banister. And of course, I immediately started to tell this child, stop, don't climb over the banister, and to try to decide quickly in my mind, should I wait at the bottom to catch this child, or should I run up the stairs to try to get to this child? Their sleepiness was affecting their physical coordination. So fortunately, this child did not get too far in climbing over the banister. This child was okay. They were just trying to escape from spiders in their nightmare. So all was well. But it was such an interesting experience for me as a parent because this was so contrary to my normal routine. I had just checked on this child. There was no reason that I should go back and stand at the bottom of the stairs and be in this moment in time to potentially prevent harm for my child. What was that? Perhaps you've had those experiences too, where maybe a thought comes into your head and then you see that play out later in the day. You think of someone and then they call you. I remember working with an executive who was really great with training material. And I watched her kind of know the exact moment that that training material was complete. And I remember thinking, I wonder what her process is. What is she noticing? She just had this felt sense that you couldn't explain or put words on. Now, over time, I began to realize that part of her intuition was based on accumulated observation. So she had a lot of experience with something. She'd refined that experience. There was pattern recognition. We see this with artificial intelligence, right? That's some of the brilliance that we get to use in some of those kinds of tools where there's massive amounts of data. So this pattern recognition, experience, refinement really allows for a great data set for us to look at to make a decision or to receive a recommendation. This executive had spent years noticing what worked and what didn't. And so eventually her system could just recognize those meaningful patterns without logically explaining every little piece of why that mattered. And a lot of experts function this way. You might have a seasoned coach that picks up something just in someone's word choice or in their body movements. You might notice this in a surgeon who just has this intuition to do a procedure a little bit differently. You might notice this in a pilot or a fighter, of course, as a parent. So we notice that sometimes they're knowing something they need to do before they can actually fully explain it. Their consciousness is not the leader. Research supports this expert intuition, if you will, that oftentimes people who've had a lot of experience in an area in their life do make fast and accurate decisions because they've had so much experience recognizing these patterns over time. Now, what about me as a young mom? I didn't have this expert experience that this executive I watched had to know that I needed to stand up at that time. I believe that intuition can come from multiple sources. Might be a pattern recognition through repeated exposure and observation. And sometimes it comes out of the blue. It's just that quiet thought that says, go check on your child one more time. To me, that's a transcendent intuition. That's a divine guidance, if you will. I was listening to a security advisor talk a little bit about intuition. He described it as a nuclear defense system that all human beings have. And he talked about how our fear instinct can also be a sign or a form of intuition. It's not safe for me to go that direction. I need to change plans. We can't explain it. It doesn't make sense to us. Or we meet someone who doesn't feel safe, kind of rubs us the wrong way, that we need to pay attention to that intuition because it's giving us real information that is valuable and it's always based on something. So what might that be coming from? That might not be coming from years of compressed experience. Perhaps it's coming from a divine place. Perhaps it's coming from our somatic or body intelligence. And it's our neuroception that's saying there's some danger coming from these physical symptoms we're experiencing. No matter what the source of that intuitive hit that you have, that knowing, that thought that just comes out of the blue, oftentimes intuition recognizes something our conscious mind can't articulate or hasn't yet articulated or doesn't know why it believes or feels this way. It doesn't come through that mental channel. And so what I notice is that oftentimes because it doesn't come through that mental channel, we tend to dismiss it because we can't prove it. We don't know how it's going to turn out. And so this really rich channel or this really rich signal that could be very, very supportive in our life, we sometimes second guess. So let's talk about why intuition matters, why we might want to spend a little more time with that intuitive signal, that intuitive intelligence we might have. Steve Jobs credited intuition with his business success. I already mentioned Albert Einstein and Steven Spielberg also talking about the power of intuition. Beyond that, a lot of business leaders believe intuition plays a critical role in effective decision making. They don't always make decisions based on just logic and data. There's some other part of them that says, this is the direction we need to go. So why might you want to develop a better relationship with your intuition? Pay attention to it a little bit more. I don't have to explain to you that we live in a world that is complex, where we are making decisions where we don't have full information, where we can't see behind the curtain on certain things, where we're having to discern through a lot of noise. One thing that intuition can do is help us filter out what is unimportant. Because when we access our intuition, what we're doing is accessing our entire human intelligence system. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. We might be accessing that pattern recognition in our minds. We might be accessing that safety instinct through our somatic or our body intelligence. Or we might be accessing some of that wisdom, that transcendent intelligence that doesn't come through logic and reason. Here's a couple points of what intuition might do. It can help us recognize patterns faster. We've already talked about this. That helps us prevent repeated mistakes or slow decision making. It can help you detect misalignment earlier. So perhaps I don't have the best feeling about this new job, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's the opportunity that I have, and I get into it and I realize, yeah, that feeling I had is playing out. Or we might feel that about a person we're dating and we go, oh yeah, I had some red flags earlier, but I wasn't sure. When we can detect misalignment earlier, that can help us prevent burnout. It can help us get out of unhealthy relationships or bad partnerships or value drift if we're just not aligned with something. Listening to our intuition can help us respond more effectively when we're uncertain. When we have so much mental information, we can tend to either loop our thinking or just shut down our thinking. And it's very difficult to move forward. We're just in this place of overwhelm. Intuition can help us be able to move forward effectively when we're in a paralysis analysis stage. Intuition can help us notice tension and inconsistency. So sometimes we're having a conversation with someone, and if I just typed it out, it makes complete sense. But there's body language, there's tone, there's something under the surface that's revealing something that is not present in the words. I can notice something through that intuition that I can't notice if I'm just logically reasoning through the words themselves. This helps us notice disengagement or hidden problems. Any parent has probably felt this before, where we notice some sort of emotional shift or something happening in our child, and it's hard to verbalize it, but you know it's there. You have enough experience with this child that you can say, hey, this is something to pay attention to. That's part of our intuitive intelligence, is noticing that tension and inconsistency. And intuition can help us stay connected to ourselves instead of constantly outsourcing decisions, right? It's so easy with AI to type in, what should I do here? How are you going to solve this problem? Where do I need to go next? And to get those messages and think, oh, great, this just made my life so much easier. It does. And as we talked about in episode 41, part of being a leader is being able to have independent thought, right? So having that independent thought includes accessing our whole person intelligence, including that intuitive part of us that's saying, something's off about this. It sounds very rational, but it doesn't feel right. So listening to that feeling that something's off is important. Okay, so now let's talk about, why don't we trust our intuition, or why do we struggle to trust our intuition? Because it's easy to say that it's amazing, but sometimes it's hard in practice to really trust that intuition. Some of the research I've looked over suggests that a lot of people value intuition. We think it's important. We agree that it has merit, but we often override it, we second guess it, or we ignore it, especially when we're uncertain or we're stressed or we're in a social pressure. Why? Let's talk about that. Number one, we're trained to prioritize logic over our internal awareness. Part of the way we're educated is that we explain, we rationalize, we prove, we defend. That's how we come to an understanding. It's very, very mental. It's different to say, I'm sensing this, I'm observing this, I just have this feeling. If I can't logically prove it, because of the way that many of us have been educated and trained, we think, I can't really trust this because I can't explain it yet. So part of our training prioritizes that rationalizing, proving, reasoning over that consciousness that something is just not quite right, or there's a tension here, or there's something happening that I can't name. Sometimes we confuse intuition with anxiety. I've experienced it, right? Where I leave the house and I think, did I leave the curling iron on? Did I leave the iron plugged in? Whatever it might be. And then I have to come back and double check. And oftentimes it's fine. It's me feeling worry and cycling in my mind. This is normal to have to figure out what's the difference. And what happens is sometimes people can say, well, I've come home multiple times to check to see if my iron is on and it's never on. So I must not have intuition that's working. That's not the case. But what we can do is pay attention to the difference in how intuition happens for us. Now, I don't know exactly how you experience things, but it tends to be, and people I've talked with, that intuition tends to feel very grounded, very simple, and very clear. It's just very concise. It's just a small, clear thought that comes in or feeling that comes in. Anxiety, or the fear that might be worrying us, tends to feel more cyclical, repetitive. We might feel a lot of anxiousness with it. We might feel kind of that spiraling from it. It's not just clear and precise. Once we start to understand how it feels in our systems, how it shows up for us, then our internal world can feel a little bit less noisy and confusing. And we can trust that intuition more. Another reason we don't trust it is because we're overstimulated, and this disconnects us from ourselves. We've talked about this on other episodes, why we might need mindfulness and other practices to help us come back to ourselves. We are constantly consuming, right? Other people's opinions, news, social media, AI's perspective, advice. And what happens is there's not a lot of time for us to have silence. And intuition is typically quiet. It's just a quick thought. It's just this underlying vibe or feeling. And our modern culture shouts. It's very, very loud. And so that intuition just kind of gets swallowed up. And we're not having contact with that awareness, those sensations, those brief, clear thoughts and reflections. And the last one I'm going to bring up today is that we have a fear of being wrong. Because intuition often lacks immediate proof, we just have these little feelings like, I should pay attention to that, or I shouldn't move forward with this. This isn't aligned for me, or something feels off. Those kind of sensations don't really carry a lot of visible evidence to justify our feelings. And so it's easy for us to rationalize why we don't need to pay attention to those. And so we can override it or avoid something because it feels irrational. And we don't want to be wrong because we don't want to feel embarrassed or foolish. And we feel safer betraying ourselves instead of risking visible uncertainty. So to recap, intuition is an intelligence. It's an important part of our whole intelligence system that helps us understand, acquire, and apply knowledge to make decisions. Intuition tends to be quiet. It's grounded, it's simple, it's clear, it's a quick thought, or it's an underlying current. It tends to clarify and illuminate. Learning to distinguish the difference between that intuition and maybe a fear reaction or an anxiety reaction is part of developing our intuition. It's part of the process, understanding how that comes to us. And it tends to be more trustworthy when we ourselves are more emotionally regulated, we're grounded, we take time to be still, bored, quiet, when we can observe and reflect, and when we have experience within a particular domain. So let me offer just a couple of practices and questions you might ask yourself as you're building your relationship with intuition. So first question could be, is there space for my system to receive intuitive signals? If not, perhaps you can take a few breaths on your way to the restroom, or you can walk outside, or you can incorporate a little more space into your day without adding a to-do list, just a little more space to hear yourself. Because again, noise can drown out that quiet intuition. The second one is, what does intuition feel like to me in my system? As we go through life, we begin to notice patterns. We begin to notice those signals that have proven trustworthy, right? I had this thought and then it happened. What did that thought feel like in my mind? How is it different from other thoughts that I have? What's happened when I've ignored those intuitive hits that have come up? What qualities tend to accompany those trustworthy signals? And over time, we begin to recognize our own signatures, what that intuition feels like to us, and we'll have the opportunity to trust that source of information. The more connected we are to ourselves, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, the more clearly we can discern what deserves our attention and filter out what doesn't. A Forbes article crowned intuition the highest form of intelligence. However you feel about intuition, I offer the invitation to pay attention to your impressions, your enlightenments, your instincts that intuition brings. If this episode resonated with you, I'd invite you to pass it along to someone else who might find similar benefit. Until we meet again, thanks for joining me.